Troopers. So last night we'd gone and gotten my wife some new paints, and she was commenting last night how much easier it was to work with new paints than old ones. And it got me to thinking about most of the model paint I have is old. I mean, I have some new ones, but unless I need a specific color, good Lord, how long does that stuff live on the shelf? And then you wind up having to reconstitute it. That little electric stirrer I've got comes in real handy for that. But and every once in a while you open one and you'll swear it's a sealed bottle, and you open it and the inside is dry as a rock. It's beyond salvation. And it makes me wonder, I mean, I got a lot of these paints sadly, when Hobby World went out of business, they were unloading a lot of old paints they'd had that had just never sold. And I knew I was taking my chance, but I mean, they gave me a huge box of the things for $20 or something like that. And you pay for it in trying to reconstitute the stuff, enough work you can get it working. And of course, they usually use, you can use like mineral spirits or acetone, but I think with the enamels, you're probably better to use actual proper thinner. And of course, isopropyl alcohol for the acrylics. So that brings up the question of the day. How do you guys reconstitute your old paints? What are your methods and techniques? I'm sure there's a ton of them I don't know. I think when I use a little acetone to get an old enamel back together, I'm kind of trying to brute force it. Because even though you can clean your brushes with that stuff, it's not really. Some of you guys, I know because you've left comments, it's a pretty detailed chemistry. Some of you guys know a great deal about this stuff, about the actual chemistry behind it. And just because a chemical will strip a brush doesn't mean it'll actually reconstitute a paint. I try to use the thinner, but I'm guessing that thinner is pretty high quality stuff, because Christ, they want what, $8 for a can of it the size of your hand. And so I use thinner like it's made of gold, which is being a cheapskate. For that matter, what do you thin your enamels and your acrylics with? I usually use isopropyl on the acrylics and thinner, actual proper thinner on the enamels. And I remember reading an article a long time ago, and I think Fine Scale Model, they got into a little bit of the chemistry, and as someone had pointed out, that what we call glues are usually actually solvents that melt the plastic and bond it. Enamel's the same way. It's a bit of an acid. It bites into the plastics, why it sticks so well. Acrylics just kind of, generally speaking, just lay on top. And we all know about sometimes the reaction between acrylics and enamels. I think I had mentioned this before, that Aurora C119 I have, which actually made the Fine Scale Modeler website a long time ago. I made it up in the markings of the one parked out at the Fort Campbell Museum. I forget how I did it, but I'd used some kind of silver aluminum paint and put something over it. Anyway, huge reaction. The paint bubbled up. Had to strip the whole airplane. Luckily, it didn't damage the plastic. The paints only went after each other. That little Mercury astronaut sitting on the glass that came from my Atomic City Mercury, it's some kind of weird rubbery plastic, and I had painted it with some sort of silver paint, 15 years ago or whatever. And it never really completely dried, hardened. I mean, I can handle it now, but for years the thing was like touching wet paint. And I don't remember what kind of paint I used, but it reacted. So that brings up, not only how do you reconstitute old paints, but how, I forget, I think it's only the enamels that normally have the reaction, but I forget. Gosh, there's a real science behind the paints. And I'm sure there's YouTube videos out there. If I'd taken 5 minutes before I did this to go watch one of them, I could keep it straight, because I only have a third of a cup of caffeine in me. By the way, tangent for a moment. I know I'm getting ready to go back to training, because last night I had my first nightmare involving a simulator. And dreamed I was like doing a check ride or something, and the guy was like, are you missing a note on your approach plate? I'm like, oh no. And I looked down and I didn't have my iPad with the approach plate out, which you go digging for, that you live off that thing. And I was like, oh, and that was bad enough it woke me up. So when you're a little kid, your nightmares are, monsters and things like that. And when you're a grown up, it's check rides and grown up stuff. uh, so anyway, back to the paints. I should make myself a little. It wouldn't even booklet. You put it on one little 3x5 card. Just remember what paints react to what, so you don't make that mistake. Should invent a memory jogger, like enamel on acrylic. You're gonna spill it. Little limericks and things. Because I think when you put enamel on top of acrylic, as the acrylic tries to bite through into the plastic, that's when it causes the reaction with certain enamels. My brain does not want to work. Normally I'm pretty good at coming up with some little rhyme real quick that help you remember. But clear coat in between, it'll have a pretty sheen. So I do know that if you put a clear coat between them, that normally will keep them from attacking each other. Which ones are the ones that attack each other? Oh, the bonehead stun. I pulled it a couple of times. I was trying to get a color. These paints won't mix, and I had gotten liquid. You have the little testers enamel bottles that you never confuse with anything else. And then you've got like some of the Model Master bottles. I think it's Model Master. You never confuse those. You never confuse those because they have kind of unique shape. This is acrylic, this is enamel. But then the Tamiya or whoever it is puts enamels and acrylics in nearly identical shaped bottles, which from a manufacturing standpoint makes sense. But the problem is, and I've done this, you think you're mixing two acrylics and you're trying to mix an acrylic and enamel, and you wonder why they won't mix, and you wind up throwing the whole batch away. And yeah, I've pulled that bonehead stunt before. I do know that gold and silver do not have to be thin. In fact, they're not supposed to be thin. They can go straight through an airbrush. You look at them and they're thinner than most other paints. But the whole thing about mixing for airbrushes gets to be a trick. Some people 40-60, some 50-50. Everybody's got their own mix. People like to say till it looks like milk. I'm kind of like, yeah, I appreciate that, but that's a little on the vague side. Man, clean. The thing is, that acrylics, one thing I'm learning that you've got to do is when you're using the airbrush, man, as soon as you're done, you've got to pull the needle out and clean that thing, because acrylics will jam the airbrush up worse than enamels sometimes. That's because it dries like sandpaper. And I just recently had a little hiccup. I could not get the needle out of the gun, and I had put isopropyl in there and kept spraying and spraying and spraying, trying to get it to penetrate and get it to finally I got the thing to break loose. But and spray guns can be so delicate. That big one I've got with a big can on top, that's much nicer. But if I've only used it a couple of times, it'll cut such a big. You get a large model, you do the whole thing so quickly and so nicely. The big Iwata, and the little one's good, but I bought 3 sets of needles, the little one different sizes, and I put, I think, the large needle in it, and that's about the only one I've used so far, because it just, with the little masking and everything else, it just does such a good general purpose job. That's what I did the Stagecoach with, but I need to practice with those little needles, doing the finery on it and everything. And God, it doesn't take you off more. Nice little, and then, something gets in there, splurt. Oh man, now you have this paint splatter on it. Like, yeah, man, I don't care what you say. When It never cleans up quite as good as it never look. You just know that's, even if you clean it all up, you just know it's under there. And the joys of model building, yay! Speaking of painting, one of you guys commented, I think yesterday or the day before, that he had a friend that liked to paint all of his airplanes or models solid silver and then put the decals on them and made sort of like a statue out of them. And he's like, it was good enough for the Romans. They didn't paint their statues, which now we have learned actually the Romans did paint their statues, according to at least some of them. But one of the history channels I watch was talking about that. Apparently, for a long time, we thought they just chiseled out the statues and put them up white. And I think it was during the Renaissance, of course, that became the fashion. That's why Europe has so many beautiful marble unmarked statues, and David and the rest of them. And then it turns out we've only recently learned that actually they did paint them, but of course, the stuff they had to make paints out of back then didn't last very long. But there's something to be said for just a solid color on an airplane, maybe some decals. Well, you think about it. The spotter models, they were solid because they knew at distance you see an airplane, you're just going to see a silhouette. And markings vary wherever you go, so it was better just to make them one solid color and learn to identify the silhouette. And well, kind of brings up the question: what is generally harder to paint correctly? Something like a car or an airplane. Now, I think the easiest thing to paint is a tank, because they tend to be, well, some of them do have fairly complex, especially German ones do have complex camouflage patterns, but a lot of armor is fairly monotone, and it's just a matter of weathering and detailing. And the beauty of tanks is blemishes can just be covered up as dirt, mud, or battle damage. And that's not to say it doesn't take talent to paint a tank. It absolutely does. I just find them the most easy and relaxing to paint. Ships, usually military ships, just, there's not that many colors usually on a basic ship, civilian ship, like black hull, white superstructure, red waterline. Of course, a ship, a lot of times you're dealing with a lot of area, which can be a bit of a trick, but of course, detailing a ship can be a nightmare, but I don't see painting them as the real challenge. Cars, figures, and airplanes, it just depends. I think, to me personally, the hardest thing to get right is an airliner, because you're talking about a fairly long area like a model ship. Airliners, generally speaking, are supposed to be clean and shiny and look new, and so any imperfection stands out. And camouflage pattern on an airplane is much easier to paint because it's camouflage. It hides a lot. The little boo-boos disappear in the cracks, so to speak. Cars, it's a mixed bag, but generally speaking, I think cars are pretty straightforward to paint until you get into something like the exotic racing designs. Now, of course, if you're using decals, not so bad, but it's like a lot of guys that will paint all the insignia on an airplane, which I've tried. I just couldn't get it right. I can see the advantages. I've tried using the frisket and everything and laying it down to that stuff, and and I guess it's practice makes perfect. You gotta mess up a lot of models to get it right. But and then of course the quality of the paint and everything else, and pressure on the air gun and all this other stuff. Imagine if I dialed the pressure down, took my time, was a little more careful. But you think about it, let's just say you're going to paint an American star on a model airplane, and the one I saw in Fine Scout model, I think it was a B-17. So he puts the frisket over the decal and traces it very carefully and cuts it out. So razor sharp X-Acto knife to begin with, because you can't have any mistakes, because if you get the outline wrong at all, and then once he gets it cut out, he lays it on in the airplane. So you're looking through clear frisket trying to make sure it's positioned properly, because it's not like a decal. You can't slide it around. Once you hit it with the paint, you're committed. So he puts the white undercoat on there, and I think he went white first, and then we'll tape and cuts out a star and frisket and covers the area that's supposed to stay white, and then it hits it again with the blue, and of course it looked fantastic. And of course paint doesn't, there's no silvering or bubbling, it's there forever. But I'm just like, man, respect. That better than I can do. I'm happy if I can get Canopy to come out clean. And man, it's like these guys that take, was it 2000 grit paper and polish the jeweler's cloth and polish the canopies till they're perfectly clear. And I'm just like, wow. Again, respect. I keep telling myself I'm going to do that. I haven't found any of that sandpaper yet. But if I was to go through all that trouble to get this beautiful clear canopy and then tape it off and spray and open it and realize that the paint had gotten underneath it. Yes, I know. You hit it with clear coat before the canopy, once you get it taped off, you hit it with clear coat to try and seal the gaps before you hit it with the paint. And make sure the airbrush has a fairly low pressure so you're not forcing it to intrude under the tape. And I've gotten some of them to come out pretty nice, but generally speaking, on 148 and 172nd scale aircraft, everything's so tiny, I just can't get the tape in there. So I use an acrylic and just hand paint it. And then you can go in with the toothpick and just clean up the excess. And with my eyes, you know, as Pete Vetri said, you know, it's good from far and far from good. And I'm good enough for these old eyes. And I have nothing but admiration, a little bit of jealousy for the people who can make these museum quality perfect builds. God bless you. But I'm keeping it trying to keep it a low stress endeavor. So all right, guys, well, that's about all for today. We will hopefully see you tonight. I got to head off to physical therapy here. You guys have a great day and take care. Bye-bye.